Hello, BookTube, and it's February 1st, which means January has finished. And so I thought I'd come to you with a video with a brief overview of what I read in January 2023 and with a TBR, partial TBR for February. Now, I didn't read as many books as I had hoped to in January, but I read the main ones that I wanted to, and there's a few reasons. My health slowed down some of my reading for the month, but I started out with finishing The Hobbit. I had started this in December before Christmas, but I only got 30 pages or 40 pages into it. So I'm counting this as part of January. I will hopefully do a video dedicated to this. I didn't care for it that much. It started out poorly for me, and hence I put it aside. And it started getting better near the end for a number of reasons, but yeah, it didn't really work for me. It's the writing, it just really talked down to the reader. I know it's children's, but there's children's books that don't do that. They don't treat the reader as basically an imbecile. And that's what I found with this. But, and that sort of put me off reading immediately Lord of the Rings, even though I know everybody's going to say it's very different and it's an adult and all that. Yes, I'm aware of that, or at least that's what I've been told. So, but regardless, I put it aside, and I'll be reading that with Mark at Book Time with Elvis probably again in December of this year. We'll put it off till then. Now, the big thing for me this year is going through a series of books. And some of them are rereads and some are partial rereads, but they're full reread. Fourth or fifth time is the Strangers and Brothers series by C.P. Snow. And I read the first chronological novel, Time of Hope. This was published in 1949. It's chronologically the first story of Lewis Eliot, his early beginnings, sort of teenage beginnings, the First World War, and up until basically 1930 or ish. It's a series of books. There's 11, I believe, or is it 12? I always miscount those. But it chronicles character Lewis Eliot, his sort of rise in many sort of worlds, social worlds of English society, basically from 1915 to his death in 1970-ish. And he becomes a lawyer. He struggles having funds to become a lawyer and so forth. But I will, again, I do hope to be able to do a continuing sort of thoughts on, and that's what it's going to be, because I don't do book reviews, but it'll be thoughts on the books I've read. Sorry, I just need to continue to take a deep breath every so often. That's the health issue that I had this year, or in January. I had a very severe breathing difficulty, which prompted me to be whisked away to the hospital. But breathing better now. It's still up and down. Also, another series that I read about the first I'm trying to read the first week of every month. Next one is the Hornblower series that I'm reading this with a number of booktubers, and I've already done a brief video for this one. that came out on Saturday. I'll see if I can link that to if anybody's interested. It's a very brief overview of the first novel, our Mr Midshipmen Hornblower. Again, we're reading these in chronological order, not publication order. And this was started by Faith at Faith and Books, and Mark Richardson are the hosts, and I'm just tagging along and reading one book a month. There are 11 of these, and I've got the first 2 omnibus editions, so I'm good for a month or so. Very rough copies, but serviceable. And they're ones that I've read I've read some of them, let's just put it that way, but never chronologically, so it's kind of nice to read these chronologically. Another series is the Dance to the Music of Time series, and you'll see this for a while, this copy, because this is an omnibus with the first 3 books. And I read A Question of Upbringing was the first novel in here, and I've attempted this series many times, and I've always failed. I always petered out at the end of the 3rd book, so I thought I would do it once a month now, and again, I hope to be able to do a video for this. And unlike the Strangers and Brothers series, I find it difficult at times being engaged with the story and the characters. However, I will say, and every time I read this, the first book, the opening scenes, the opening few pages are absolutely fantastic and well written, and I really enjoyed those. And but I'll get more into depth, I hope, with my thoughts on video. And another series is the Sackets, and I haven't did a video for this yet. This is Sackett's Land by Louis L'Amour. There's 19 books in this. They're mostly fairly small, so it's Mark Richardson decided to read through these. So again, another series that I've read bits and pieces of, but never in chronological order. This was a fun read. It's set around 1600 in England for the most part, but it comes to they take a weekend jaunt to the New World. That's what it seems like in anyway. So I'll get a little more in depth about this, but it was a fun read. But obviously, you just can't take it too seriously. The historical aspects, he's got things that are not correct historically in it, but you just sort of just put those aside and enjoy the story for what it is. And it's about the first of the Sackets, sort of, that comes to the New World, Barnabas Sackett. And another series is the Rouge en Macre series by Emile Zola. It is 20 novels, varying in length about this size to a little more, maybe 400 or 500 for a couple of the novels. And it's about these 2 families that are sort of they start out connected and then they sort of veer off. Very different in temperament, or at least in this one. Very, very well done. It's very bleak. Emile Zola doesn't care for happiness in his stories, generally. But this one is set in 1851-52 with the sort of uprising. 1851, December. There was a coup d'etat by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's got to do with some fighting and the 2 families sort of looking back at the history and the beginnings of these 2 separate parts of the family. And very good. I thoroughly enjoy it. French 19th century French writers really, really work for me for the most part. And then something that was sort of a late addition. Some of the pages have got crimped here. And this was for Vin at Revenant Reads does a Gothic type book club. And this was sort of Gothic adjacent, where Gothic writers have used this, but it is Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater. And this is the 1822 book version, which it was actually originally serialized in, I think, the Edinburgh, Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, and then later in the 1850s, I think, that De Quincey expanded it. I may or may not do a full video for this, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. I had never read the full 1822. Oh no, I haven't read it at all. The 1822 version of this. I have read the first part of it from that was, I don't know how different it was from the original serialization. It was in 2 parts, and then I had read the 1852 one. The 1850s version of it. So this was really nice. I really enjoyed it. De Quincey has an interesting style. He does belabor the point at times, but I think there's a reason for that. And it also too is very foundational for his writing, for what he started writing about, and a lot of the subject matters are sort of glimpsed in here when he was young, as a teenager, because it's mostly about him. Well, there's many levels of this story. It's sort of semi autobiographical, where he runs away from school when he's like 15, and he goes to London, and he's basically struggling to survive, and the people he meets, and also talking about his addiction to opium, and where it started, how it started, and some of the sort of psychedelic, not really psychedelic, but euphoric experiences using the drug. So, yeah, and like I say, it also has to do with his foundation as a writer, and things like where he's learning certain things. And I'll just go through a couple others here before I get to the big books. I read this for my Patreon book club. If you're interested, then there will be a link below. And this is John Buchan's Prester John, set in South Africa. It's very of the time. I'd read this in my teens, and I'd sort of forgotten that it's a very boy's own adventure type story. It was enjoyable, and I'm glad I reread it. I came away with different views of it, I'm sure, than I originally had for it, but very interesting in many ways. But yeah, I won't be doing a video on this, but if you are interested, then we do have a Voxer group, and every month we choose a book from 4 to read. And something that I've been reading throughout the whole month is sort of like one chapter, one story out of this, which is Scottish Folk and Fairy Tales from Burns to Buchan, talking with John Buchan. And this was very, very interesting. It's kind of hard maybe to do. I did a video with a couple of the little sort of very dark fairy tale stories at the beginning of this, but it's very good. And yeah, I don't think I'll be doing a video for this because it's a little too fractious of the type of stuff that it's talking about. It would take too long. You could almost do a little video with each little story, but it goes through. There's some really great ones. The authors, it's a Penguin classics, and it's collected together, selected and edited by Gordon Jarvie, and that was done in 1992 by the looks of it, and then reprinted 2008. So we got Elizabeth Grierson, James Hogue, Elizabeth Grierson again, a lot of Elizabeth Grierson, Joseph Jacobs, Betsy White, George MacDonald, Robert Louis Stevenson, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Andrew Lang, Violet Jacob, John Lauren Campbell, John Francis Campbell. Really good stories in there. Now, one that I had planned to read. It was started out to be a buddy read, but I think for various reasons, the other I don't think they finished this, as far as I can tell. But this was a reread for me, but not in this translation. Alexander Dumas' Count of Monte Cristo. This is the Robin Buss translation and the Penguin classics, and 1996. And it says revised, reissued with new chronology and further reading. And it's a honker. It's with notes. Basically, it comes in at just under 1,300 pages. I had read this originally about 40 years ago, and I originally read it as it was in my school library, and I read it as an abridged, but I didn't realize it was abridged until I finished it, and then I really loved it, and I was really angry that it was abridged. So I begged and pestered the librarian to get me an unabridged version. So they got me an unabridged version, which was in 2 volumes, which turns out it must have been the 1846 or somewhere in the 1840s translation, the anonymous translation. And I thoroughly loved it at the time. But I hadn't read it since then. And this was a new, basically a new read for me, because it's a new translation. And it's definitely gone up there to one of my favorites of definitely French literature, along with which we'll be talking in a moment, Les Miserables and Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais. And this is so fantastic. It's Robin Buss does an amazing translation. He puts it in very contemporary language now, very easy English language. And it's got still some footnotes or endnotes, and it's just so wonderful how Dumas ties everything in together and just sort of pulls everything together for this. Again, this requires a thoughts on video for this book, but it is now one of my favorites, now up there with that. And it should have always been, but I hadn't read it in so long a time, so it wasn't in current sort of memory. The other two that I mentioned, Les Miserables and Gargantua Pantagruel, in the last 40 years, I've read them at different periods, like, like they were first read sometime in the 80s, and then anyway, it's like I read them again, so they were more current and fresh in my mind. So yeah, that was really good. And then I had this slated sort of for January, but I wasn't going to read it all in January, or at least that wasn't the plan. It was to start a little bit in January here and then continue through February, but that didn't happen. I started reading this and completed it. It's about 1,450 pages with all the notes. And it again is the new translation by Christine Doniger that she did in 2013-ish, by the looks of it. And again, this still rates up there with one of my favorite books. And her translation is marvelous, and she gets a lot of the humor that Victor Hugo has put into this, and it's just marvelous. And anybody who thinks they're finding this daunting, I would say don't find it daunting for the language, especially if you get a modern translation like this, or even Norman Denny's translation that was done in the 70s. This one's better. I've read both. I've read Norman Denny's 2-3 times. And I've tried to read the original translation by Charles Wilbur. I think that was 1862, the first American translation. I think I gave up on that for a variety of reasons, but I will revisit that at some point. But yeah, this is marvelous, and some people complain about the digressions, but the digressions are needed, like in Dumas with Count of Monte Cristo. Those extra storylines are really integral to what the author is trying to do as a whole, and as has been pointed out, they're interesting as well. And yeah, so again, this requires a thoughts on. But this was the last book. I finished it last night, just before midnight. It took me a lot longer than I expected, about 4 days longer than 3 or 4 days longer than I expected. So I had hoped to complete a few more books, but that was because of health issues, that I couldn't read as much per day. But yes, if this is something I would suggest, if you've been putting off, do pick up. And even if you read it slowly, it's done in like 365 chapters, so you could just start January 1st and read a chapter a day and be done in a year. So now we're at 22 minutes, so I'm going to continue with my TBR for next month. And I'm not going to say much about these. I'll just show them. This is George Passat. This is the second in the Strangers and Brothers by C.P. Snow. The second, His Excellency Eugene Rougon in the Rougon-Macquart Emile Zola series. Now I'll be reading Paradise Lost with Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics and Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. This is a reread for me, but again, it's so long ago that I've read this. But I am looking forward to digging back into this. And then the second volume in the Sackett series, To the Far Blue Mountains. And this is a longer one. This one is, it's like almost 400 pages long. Now, also the second in the Dance to the Music of Time and A Buyer's Market. Second in the Hornblower series, Lieutenant Hornblower. Also, too, going back to Dumas this month, and with the Three Musketeers, and I'm reading this with a group read, buddy reads, or group read. Becky at I'm gonna get her. I'll put it down at the video down at the bottom. A Story in a Teacup, I think, is her her channel is, but she's reading, and she's organized a group read of Three Musketeers. And in August, I will be reading with Mark at Book Time with Elvis the newest translation by Lawrence Ellsworth. So I thought, well, between now and then, let me read a couple other translations. I've read this before. The translation I read was the Lord Sudley translation a long time ago and loved it. So this is the first translation, the anonymous translation from 1846. At least I believe it is, because it's a bit of an oddity that the anonymous translation has been fiddled with by publishers. It's never 100% the same text, but I believe that is. So I'm going to read that this month and there's a Voxer group with a lot of readers, and I'm not sure if any more booktubers, but I will be doing a video regarding that eventually. And also too, Mark at Book Time with Elvis, I've mentioned him several times now, but he is doing a year of French reading, so I thought I'd join along with him and reread. Most of them are rereads, except 2, I think, are rereads for me. And this month is the tiny Candide by Voltaire. Out of here, I think it's less than 100 pages, but probably will go on and read the rest of this as well as the month goes on. But that's this month is Candide by Voltaire. And to combine with that, I thought I would read that book on the fairy tales. What I did was I read either a story in the morning or a story at night, just throughout the whole month. So I've got 2 books here now with letters. Here's Voltaire's Letters Concerning the English Nation, which I'll do. That's a very slim volume. I'll read like a letter or 2 in the morning or a letter or 2 at night, or both. And then also I have Pliny the Younger complete letters, and I'll be doing the same thing with that throughout the month. I'll read a few letters at a time and hopefully get both these done by the end of the month. And that hopefully won't be all. I have no huge books this month to read. I've purposely not done that. The longest it's only 600 and some pages, so I don't really count that as a huge book. It is the Three Musketeers. So I'm hoping to add a few other things. There's a number of books that I didn't read in January, so I'm hoping to add those in, or possibly something else. It depends. So I'm trying to leave things open. I've got some Hal Clement that I wanted to continue, and some other science fiction. The Future History Project by Isaac Asimov that I got to continue. So I have those things to add this month. But anyway, thank you very much. If you've read any of these books, do let me know. All the links are down at the bottom. As I say, if you want to join the Patreon reading group, then the link will be down below to my Patreon. Yes, and I'll see you next time, BookTube. Thank you.